Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining our show. Today's guest is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Dr. Roberts has had careers in scholarship and academia, journalism, public service, and business. He is chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. He has held academic appointments at Virginia Tech, Tulane University, University of New Mexico, Stanford University, George Mason University, and Georgetown University. Dr. Roberts was associate editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal and columnist for Business Week and the Scripps Howard News Service. President Reagan appointed Dr. Roberts Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy, and he was confirmed in office by the U.S. Senate. Dr. Roberts was awarded the Treasury Department's Meritorious Service Award for his outstanding contributions to the formulation of United States economic policy. He is listed in Who's Who in America and Who's Who in the World. We are very pleased to have him with us, only on TV24.li.
Dr. Roberts, thank you for joining us. Welcome to our show.
Pleased to be with you.
Dr. Roberts, I would like to ask you, since you're foremost an economist, and in our country, or well, throughout Europe, people don't really know what's happening or what has happened with the crisis. Could you explain us when did it start and why it happened?
Yes, the United States has two very serious causes of economic crisis. One is the offshoring of American middle-class jobs. The corporations, in order to reduce their labor costs, raise their profits, and raise the bonuses of management, shipped American middle-class jobs to India, to China, elsewhere offshore, where they are performed at a very low labor cost. So this has stopped the growth of American consumer income. And the people, unable to continue to increase consumption because they had no growth in income, the central bank, known as the Federal Reserve, started a credit boom. They lowered interest rates, which drove up home prices. People with mortgages were able to refinance their homes, take out the higher price, to take out the equity in the form of money and spend it, and that kept the consumer economy going until the debt built up to such levels that it wasn't possible to incur any more debt. Now, all of that debt led into the financial crisis. The refinancing of the mortgages, the issuing of new mortgages, many of which were of dubious credit quality. They were misrepresented as investment-grade securities. They were packaged, securitized and packaged, and sold to investors around the world.
So several times the same debt was sold several times.
Exactly, that's right. The same debt, packaged, repackaged, sold. And this is sort of the basis for the financial crisis. Now, nothing has been done about the loss of American jobs. That still continues. And the only thing they did about the financial crisis was to expand the government debt and the creation of new money in order to bail out or save the big banks. There's really only about 5 giant banks that they worry about. As part of the deregulation, part of the consequence of repealing the Glass-Steagall Act, which had long been the basis for the
Could you explain us? Could you tell us what Glass-Steagall Act was and what happened in 1999 with it?
The Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial banks from investment banks and made it impossible for depositors' money to be used in speculations. So a commercial bank would take deposits from ordinary people and use those deposits as a basis for loans, both to consumers and to businesses.
So it would be people for mortgages for the houses or small businesses?
Yes, that's right, or car loans.
Yes.
And investment banks, they would take extreme risk, but it was with their own capital, not with depositors' money. And so the risks were constrained to the investment bank. But in 1999, the Clinton administration agreed with the banks and some senators, and they repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, so that now there's no difference between a commercial bank and an investment bank.
Did it mean that the commercial banks, they could start doing risky business with consumers' money?
Yes, that's what happened, exactly. And so this is part of how we got the financial crisis. Now, with the financial crisis, the government is only focused on saving the banks. And in order to do that, the debt of the United States government has greatly expanded. In fact, it's dramatically expanded. And much of the debt is being monetized. That means the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is purchasing the government's debt. So it's the behavior of what we used to think of as third world countries in South America.
Dr. Roberts, could you explain us something about the Federal Reserve? Because it sounds like a government body, but we know it's not.
Yes, it's the central bank that was formed in 1913.
On Jekyll Island.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it is supposedly an independent bank, independent of the Treasury or the government's own policy. But in practice, it isn't. Government, it's the creditor to the government because it can always buy the government's bonds. And it is also a protector of the banks, especially the large banks.
Do they issue the money? Do they print the money?
Yes, they issue the money. They no longer have to print it. They just create it electronically on a keyboard of a computer.
Now,
and so
it looks like a really good business because you create money out of thin air and you actually lend it to a U.S. government or to the people of the United States. So it's a win-win situation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But you see, actually, the Federal Reserve returns to the Treasury the interest that the Treasury pays.
Okay.
It doesn't keep it or give it to private parties. It pays its operating expense and returns the rest of the interest back to the Treasury. The real defining feature of the Federal Reserve is that it is a creditor to the government. So anytime the government has difficulty selling its debt issues and doesn't want a rise in interest rates, the Federal Reserve can step in and buy the debt itself. And that is why interest rates today in the United States are so low.
They are almost zero, aren't they?
Well, the rate that the Federal Reserve loans to the banks is practically zero. I think it's 25 basis points. That is 1/4 of 1%.
Yeah.
The interest rate on 10-year Treasury bonds is just under 2%. So if you buy a Treasury bond, you're getting an interest rate that is below the current rate of inflation. That is, you're getting a negative interest rate.
Yes.
This doesn't make any sense. Most people don't buy an asset that's depreciating and paying them a loss.
Yeah.
And it's only possible because the Federal Reserve can buy the bonds to drive up the price and thereby lower the rate of interest. And so
Is there a reason why they are doing it?
Yes, they're trying to recapitalize the 5 large banks that they're worried about failing. The 5 large banks own 96% of the $230 trillion in derivatives.
You're talking about J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and so on.
Yes, Citibank, Bank of America, and I think the 5th one is Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
They don't have very much of that. It's really the top 4 that own the most. Now, $230 trillion is 15 times the size of the United States economy.
Yes, yearly.
The government and the financial system are so irresponsible, they've allowed gambling bets that are not covered with risk capital to be placed that are 15 times larger than the United States economy. Now, this crisis is taking on dimensions of its own because it's really not possible to create $230 trillion in money to cover these bets.
You are saying betting. How do they bet with the money, or what do they do with it?
All right. Most of the derivatives, 81% of the derivatives consist of what are called interest rate swaps. Now, what an interest rate swap is, one party tells the other, I'm betting interest rates are going to fall, and so I will pay you a floating rate of interest. In exchange, you pay me the current fixed rate. And if the counterparty says, okay, I think interest rates are going to rise, I'll take that side of the bet. And so that is the...
So they are betting amongst each other?
They're betting against each other.
Now,
yet, Goldman Sachs, for example, the investment bank, has $44 trillion in interest rate swaps, but it only has $19 billion in risk capital. So it has placed bets that are 2,300 times larger than its ability to cover the bets.
Isn't it illegal?
It used to be, but the deregulation achieved, it no longer is. Moreover,
so the deregulation actually opened the field for the crooks.
That's exactly what it did. It always, financial deregulation always opens the field for crooks.
Now, I would like to ask you, if we would go over the Atlantic and come to Europe, what happened here?
2 things. The European banks, trusting Wall Street, purchased huge amounts of these junk derivatives. So when the derivative crisis hit, it impaired their capital. They were harmed. They were made weaker. The second stage of the European crisis then set in because the European banks had also purchased what they call sovereign debt, the debt of Greece, of Italy, of Spain, Portugal, Ireland. And the central banks of those countries, because they're part of the EU and the Euro, no longer have the ability to create money to back their government's debt. And so the question is, European banks, already damaged by the American derivatives, are now facing large losses on sovereign debt. And the question is, how is that to be resolved? The banks want to make the people of the countries, the people in Greece, Spain, and Italy, make the bonds good. That means the people have to have their pensions cut, have to give up employment, have to have public sector goods privatized and sold off.
They want to bring in austerity, but I would like to ask you, let's say Greece, because Greece been on, on the news, for forever now. Is everything what they owe? Is it the money what they really got and spent?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. The Greek government was able to sell more debt than the EU rules permit because Goldman Sachs helped them disguise their indebtedness.
Disguise? This sounds like a fraud to me.
Yeah, it's like the mafia.
Very nice.
It's like it's gangster. In the United States, we call the banks banksters.
Yes.
That's a combination of bank gangsters.
Yeah.
And you see, this is all new. This has all happened in the last 12 years. And it's an unprecedented development. So the entire policy of the United States and also now of the European Union is focused not on saving the economies, but on saving the banks.
All right, but if I go back to Greece, if the government did something it wasn't supposed to do, yeah, and Goldman Sachs helped them to disguise it, all right, that's fine. Isn't the government responsible for it if it was a fraud? Why are the people of Greece, why are they supposed to pick up the tab now?
Well, because the government of Greece hasn't got any money except what it can extract from the people of Greece. And so the banks are saying, yes, it's your fault, government of Greece. You have to pay us. We don't want to write off these loans. Our capital is already impaired. And so you go squeeze the people of Greece, take away their benefits, and use the money to pay us. Now that is the policy that is being applied to Greece. And it appears to be the one that will be applied to Italy and to Spain.
And Ireland.
In other words, you have to understand that, the Prime Minister of Greece had to resign. And the banks appointed the Prime Minister.
Yeah, the guy was ex-Goldman Sachs guy, wasn't he? The same in Italy.
In Italy, he was ex-Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, the entire Italian cabinet is appointed. None of them were elected.
So no one is elected, they're appointed.
They're appointed. So
it's like EU.
Right. Democracy is being destroyed. And of course, the EU bureaucrats are using the crisis to take over the economic policy of the individual countries. They say, we can't trust the governments, look what's happened, and so we are going to consolidate and we will make the tax decisions, the budget decisions for all the countries.
Well, do you think it was premeditated, that it was done the way so they can take over?
Oh, I don't know. Of course, the EU government wants the power.
Of course they do.
So whether it was premeditated or not, they certainly see the opportunity in the crisis
to seize power.
To get the power. And you may have seen that just recently the American billionaire George Soros said that the only way the EU can be saved is if the central government gets the power.
Well, we are not really keen to listen to this guy because he comes from the country next to us, from Hungary, and we know who he is and who he was, so we don't listen to him too much.
But it shows the way of thinking, you see, and so the thought is supportive in the United States of the European Union becoming a more centralized power. In fact, the individual members of the EU would lose their self-determination.
Yeah, well, it doesn't look good for us. I know that much. Now, I would like to ask you, we had a couple days ago, we had on Dr. Jerome Corsi, and we were talking about actually what's happening in the United States, and having, you mentioned George Soros. Yeah, he said that the only obstacle between them and the global government is the United States. So I would like to ease into this question. It looks like maybe for the last 20 years, the globalists, they have been trying to take over the United States, or actually get the United States on their knees.
Well, you see, the United States, or the corporations, it really depends on what you mean by globalist. But in the United States, what has happened is the manufacturing corporations and now the professional service corporations, they are in favor of globalism because to them it means they hire cheaper foreigners to produce the goods and services that they sell to Americans. So Americans are separated from the incomes associated with the production of the goods and services that they consume.
Didn't General Motors use the bailout money to actually move the factories out of the United States?
They may have used some of it for that purpose, but the factories were already being moved out regardless of the bailout. And so that what globalism means is you can produce for your home markets not by using your own labor force, but by using labor forces elsewhere that are underemployed, can be cheaper, hired at cheap wages. So that's one aspect of globalism. The other aspect of globalism is that you transform the agricultural communities of the rest of the world, these self-sufficient agricultural communities, and you turn them into monocultures. So
that happened here. That happened here. They killed off our agriculture in this country.
Yes, they make you produce for the world market. You produce one or two crops. You're no longer self-sufficient. You have to start importing your food. And that's the other aspect of globalism. And it's an insane, harmful policy. But it benefits a few powerful special interests. The very large corporations, both in manufacturing and in agribusiness.
Do you think that these large corporations, they have a big influence over the politicians?
Oh, they totally control the politicians. In the United States, the government is not accountable to the people. It's accountable to the powerful special interests that provide the campaign contributions for the elections.
Yeah, it's same here. It's the same
here. That's right. It's the notion of democracy is a fraud. There's no democracy in the United States.
There's no democracy in our country. It looks like it is, or there is something, but it's not.
No. They go through the routine of elections, but it doesn't matter who's elected. The same interest groups own them all.
That's the point. See? So whether you choose, you want me to slap you with my right hand or left hand, you're gonna be slapped anyway. So it doesn't matter. It's same here. It's the same here. I would like to ask you about the TSA in the United States, because again, no one is talking about things like this. Yeah, and whatever is the TSA doing to you guys, it had been done to us by the communists. So we know what it is, but our people or our viewers don't even know it's happening in the United States.
Well, in the last 12 years, the United States has become a police state. It's just as much a police state as Gestapo Germany or as Stalinist Russia.
Or as Great Britain.
The United States became a police state because of what they call 9/11, September 11, 2001, the alleged attack by Muslim terrorists on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Now, that event has been used to destroy the United States Constitution, to destroy the civil liberties that the Constitution guarantees, and to make the president or the executive branch, the office of the presidency, unaccountable to law, to the people, to Congress, or even to the courts, because they used the pretext of the war on terror.
And that was the Patriot Act that started with
Patriot
that.
Act was part of it, the National Defense Authorization Act, but the name of these acts isn't important. What is important is that the executive branch has asserted and achieved by use and by the complicity of Congress and the courts and the media. The executive branch has asserted the power to imprison American citizens, to steal their property without due process of law. They can simply throw you in a dungeon just like a medieval robber baron could throw somebody in the dungeon for the rest of his life, never present any evidence to a court.
So no jury, no judge.
No jury, no judge, no evidence, and the government doesn't even have to tell the imprisoned person why he's imprisoned. And now what has happened, the Obama regime fooled people, and they thought that Obama was going to overturn those policies, but instead he codified them into law, and then he asserted a new power, which is he can murder American citizens without due process of law.
This is the NDAA, which he signed 31st of December, and everybody was very quiet about it.
Yes, he can assassinate. In fact, there was an article recently in a publication called The New Yorker, which describes how he sits in his office drawing up lists of people to be murdered. And no one says anything about it. The people accept it.
But why would they accept it? What was the tale which sold it to the people?
They've been told that it's necessary to protect them from terrorists, and that he only puts terrorists on the list. But how would they know? Because no evidence is required.
So anyone can be a terrorist?
Anybody, it's up to him.
It's up to Obama and his office.
Yeah, and we see this same policy applied to other countries. The United States launches drones which go into sovereign countries and murders their citizens.
How?
And he says these are terrorists we're murdering, but there's no evidence. No one knows.
How come the NATO, him and France and the United Kingdom, how come they could bomb Libya without, or how come United States could send bombs over the Libya without the consent from the Congress? Isn't it unconstitutional?
Well, as I said, the Constitution no longer exists. The president, the Bush presidency destroyed the Constitution, and Obama has simply codified that. So the argument now that comes from the president is that he doesn't have to ask Congress for war-making powers. He now gets them from the UN.
Well, doesn't the Congress have a power of purse? Cannot they say, well, all right, you can send your soldiers wherever you want to, we are not giving you bullets?
Yes, they have the power of the purse, and they also have the power to impeach. And everything that Bush and Obama have done would have been impeached in prior times.
So why didn't it happen?
I think it's because of the fear of terrorism that the administration has used, and it's because once we have soldiers in the field abroad, the Congress feels that it can't cut off funding and leave the troops without ammunition, without supplies. And so if it feels if it does that, the people will think the Congress is unpatriotic, not supporting its own army. Moreover,
you are right. That wouldn't be really good. But what about to tell them up front? You go there. We are not sending you bullets. So, and then I would like to see the army to move.
Yes, and the answer to that is that the military security complex gives large campaign donations to Congress.
So
So the military security complex makes billions of dollars in profits off of wars. And so if Congress says, no, we're not going to support this next war, you're not going to make billions of dollars, then they lose their campaign contributions. So it's really rigged against the Congress. The Congress is really not a very powerful institution anymore.
Well, are you trying to tell me that a congressman in the United States, to keep his job or to keep his post, is willing to send the army anywhere and kill millions of people, and it's fine with him?
Yes, that's proved to be the case.
That's
especially if the Israeli government is in favor of it.
Yeah, of course.
Because they are an extremely powerful lobby group
in the United States.
So you have the military security complex, you have the Israel lobby. We had these two distinguished scholars, one at Harvard University, one at the University of Chicago, who wrote the book, the Israel lobby, showing their exercise of power. And then we have Wall Street, which likes to have the wars as well, because it leads to deficits and financing. So the whole thing is organized to support war because it's profitable to a few powerful interests. And the Congress is not strong enough anymore to get in the way of that. You see, what's happening in the United States is the president is becoming a Caesar.
Yeah, an emperor.
And eventually he'll be an emperor. He acts and then comes up with a reason that he was justified in acting, and the Congress just accepts it.
Oh, that's fine. That's 500 odd people. What about 330 million people? Don't they have something to say about it?
No, they have nothing to say about it. Part of it is they don't have any information. It's not just your country that doesn't have news. The media here was concentrated like the financial industry. It used to be the United States had a varied and dispersed and independent media.
Yes.
But they allowed, the Clinton administration allowed 5 giant firms to buy up the media. So now the media is
to buy up the smaller outlets.
They're all concentrated now in huge enterprises, and they now function as a ministry of propaganda. So it makes the government's case rather than questioning the government's case.
So they are actually not doing their job. Instead of, well, they ran out on the other side, didn't they? They swapped.
They ended up, it's a ministry of propaganda. That's what the American media is.
So instead of keeping the government in check, they are helping them with the propaganda. Same thing here.
Yeah, that's what's happened. And
isn't the reason that the same people who are running the government are running the media as well?
In part, but mainly what's happened is when the large corporations purchase the media, then the journalists who used to run it are out. It's now run by corporate advertising executives. And they don't want any trouble with the government or with advertisers. Because you see, the government grants the broadcast licenses.
Same
and
here.
The value of the big companies is their broadcast licenses. So if they anger the government, they lose their licenses. And so the billions and billions of dollars of the company just disappears. So they cooperate for that reason. And the journalists that still exist understand, as do their editors, that they have to help the government's line not be a problem by questioning. And there's no more investigative reporting in the United States. It's just they repeat whatever the government says. And the financial press does the same.
But you do have some really big independent media as well, like Matt Drudge or InfoWars.
It's on the internet.
Yes.
The independent media is on the internet.
What about talk radio? Is it still free?
Some small parts of it, but most of the stations are part of these big conglomerates. We used to have an alternative voice called National Public Radio. It used to give an alternative view, usually the old liberal view, but it was silenced effectively by the George W. Bush administration.
Do you think that Glenn Beck and Judge Napolitano, they were fired because they were going after Obama? Or, well, Glenn Beck went after George Soros, didn't he? And they were fired from Fox.
I think I don't know why they fired Glenn Beck. I think he got sort of more and more out of control in his presentations. But I think he was aligned with the interest of Fox News and the interest of the government. I think he was one of the propagandists.
Yeah, but somehow he got out of the control then.
His behavior became strange. He'd cry and scream and yell, and so I think that maybe had something to do with it. But the judge was organized by the judge. Napolitano was removed from Fox News because he kept stressing the destruction of the United States Constitution by the executive branch. And he kept stressing the loss of civil liberties, which actually define the nature of being an American. When we lose our civil liberties, we're no longer Americans. We're serfs or slaves. Because we have.
What are you trying to say? That if you speak up to defend the people or the Constitution, or speak up against the crooks, you will get fired?
You get fired, exactly. And so it was a great surprise to many people that they had the judge on, but they didn't tolerate him very long. And so it serves as a warning to the others.
Well, this happened after they started to go after Rupert Murdoch in England, didn't it?
Yes, that's true.
All right.
But in the United States, the control of the media is even more thorough.
See, we have a TV station here. Yes?
Look, I was the associate editor of the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
I was a columnist for Business Week for 16 years. Columnist for the Scripps Harvard News Service. I was one of the leading figures. It's impossible for me to get a single article published in the print media in the United States, or to appear on any of the television programs.
So you are banned because of things what you say.
I'm an internet personality, and I appear on foreign television, but not in my own country, despite all the high offices that I held in the government and in journalism. So if you tell people the truth, you're not welcome. And it's not, none of us know how much longer we're going to be allowed to speak out, even on the internet.
Well, we've got the CISPA, SOPA, ACTA and whatnot going on, so they are trying to, regulate it from each side. The Bilderberg Group last week, I heard rumors that their main thing was to actually to get an internet ID for Europe. Have you heard of it?
No, I don't know about it.
That was their main agenda. Now, what I was going to say, we have a TV station here which is owned by Ted Turner as well. We have a commercial TV station. So, what can you tell us about him?
Well, you know, originally Ted Turner with CNN brought a new independent voice into the media.
So what happened to him?
I don't know what happened other than he ended up having to sell it and let it be merged into these large conglomerates. So I don't know why, whether he wanted to be part of the system rather than to be an outsider that they could threaten. I don't know the reason.
Yeah, but
maybe he wanted to get his money out, because when you sell out, then you actually have the cash. Whereas if you own the station, you have the implied wealth of the station, but you don't have the cash. So I don't really know what happened. I don't know the answer.
Oh, maybe he sold out not just his station, he sold out his beliefs as well.
He may not have had any choice. We just have no way of knowing.
I'd like to go back to the TSA, because we started and then people don't know what's happening at the airports in the United States. You know, them really going into people's pants and these aggressive pat downs and all the things what are happening over there. Well, what can you tell us about it?
Well, the very intrusive searches are justified by what I think are hoaxes, like the underwear bomber. I don't think the underwear bomber was a bomber. I think this was a hoax designed to create the fear that they then exploit with the Transportation Safety Administration.
You mean the guy who was put on the plane in Amsterdam by 2 government agents?
Yes, right, with no passport.
Yes, but he got on.
Right, and it wasn't a bomb. It was just something to make smoke. And then they use that, you see, to sell these scan machines that would show you naked without clothes. And so people could sit there and stare at your genitals, your body, and if you were an attractive woman, then they had a great time looking at you there.
But didn't they roll those
scanners? Then they give you a very personal hand scan. They touch your genitals, they feel you up, so to speak. And I think what this is about is 2 things. It's training,
conditioning.
It's training a class of Americans to not have any objections to subjecting fellow citizens to these kinds of intrusive searches, and it's training the American people to accept these as part of travel, as part of life. And so younger people who don't remember what freedom was like, they grew up in this, and it's just natural to them, it's normal, they have never known any different.
Yeah, but it's awful. Hitler did the same thing.
Yes, that's right. It's the way they condition people to accept intrusive authority, and it's the way they train a Gestapo.
And the people they bought into it just because of their safety.
That's right. That's the initial. People fall into it because of the safety, but then the younger people, as they come along, they don't know any different anyhow. To them, it's just part of life.
So it's going to take them another 10, 15 years, and one generation will pass, and that's it. They are in.
That's it. That's right. You see, you have to be my age remember when you could board an airliner without any security.
Good old times then.
Yes. So
now,
but you see,
I would like to ask you about Mitt Romney. Yeah, because I know a lot of Americans, or especially the conservatives, the Republicans, they think that if he wins, then everything's gonna be all right. But to me, he seems to be a copy of Obama.
That's right. He's a copy. It's like we've already decided, Norbert. The same interest groups own all the candidates, and so if anything, he's worse than Obama. If you look at how he has staffed up his advisors, which will be his future government, a very large number of them are dual Israeli-American citizens with a very strong, known in very strong loyalty to Israel. So the prospects of invading Iran are even higher with Romney, because his advisors will push even harder than Obama's. And also, Romney has said that he is going to bring military pressure to bear on China. He's going to get China straight. So China is not...
You mean the country who you owe the most?
Yeah, that's right, but it's our biggest creditor, except for the Federal Reserve. But China is not Iraq.
Yeah,
China and Russia now have an alliance. They're now forming the BRIC Bank with India, South Africa, Brazil.
Yeah.
China and Japan are now making a deal to conduct their trade between each other without use of the dollar. So when he says he's going to put pressure on China, he's telling everybody, I'm going to cause even more trouble.
Do you think that he wants to bring in a new Cold War?
I think that military security complex wants a new Cold War.
They
missed the Soviet Union. See, the Soviet Union was very convenient because they had a 40-year Cold War. They didn't have to fight, but they could spend endless sums of money. The trouble with the war on terror is it's a hot war. And if you're a superpower, how come it took 8 years before you could get out of Iraq?
Yeah.
11 years in Afghanistan, and you've not made any progress. So these hot wars undermine your reputation as a superpower, and it demoralizes the military. You see, in the United States military today, suicides exceed battle deaths, despite the wars. So they don't like the hot wars, and they want a Cold War, and they've been looking around for a good target. They tried to make Russia the target. That's why they surrounded Russia with the American missile bases.
Yes.
Claiming that it's against Iran. Everybody knows it's against Russia. But Russia didn't really take the bait exactly. So now they've got China, because they're much more worried about China, because it looks like the Chinese economy is going to exceed the size of the American economy in the next 3 years. So that makes China the most economically powerful. So they're worried about that. So they're going to make the Cold War with China.
Yeah, well, but look, even the labor is cheap in China. They are producing almost everything. They are producing, unlike us.
Right. That's right. They now produce more cars than the United States. The United States is dependent on China for its manufactured products, for much of its high technology products. It's also, as we said, the largest creditor to Washington. But we have the government in Washington has announced they're redeploying the United States Navy to Asia and to the South China Sea. The Secretary of State said that the South China Sea is an area of American national interest.
What kind of interest?
The naval base the Navy is going back to Subic Bay in the Philippines.
Okay.
We've put Marines in Australia. We're putting Marines in other Asian countries. The Americans are building a new naval base on a South Korean island. So the whole thing is to concentrate military force around China. Now, this is not what China wants. China is in the business of making money, developing markets, and doing a very good job of it.
They are investing in Africa now, aren't they, the Chinese?
That was the reason we overthrew Gaddafi in Libya. Yeah. Because China had extensive oil investments in eastern Libya. So we wanted China out of that. We want China out of other parts of Africa which have oil. So the United States has created what is called the Africa Command.
Yes.
Not the Africa Corps under Rommel,
yes.
but the Africa Command. And so the Chinese are in Africa on an economic basis. The Americans are there militarily.
Could you tell us who were these rebels, in Libya? Who were these people?
It was organized by the CIA, and they relied on one of the tribes that was sort of cut out of the Gaddafi rule and allocation of resources, or a tribe that was more ambitious than its role under Gaddafi. And so this tribe was able to be used by the CIA, and then from there they brought in smaller groups and smaller. Once you see change coming, people tend to join. And when they saw that the United States and Europe were determined to remove Gaddafi, it kind of undermined the support that he had in the country. People don't want to end up on the wrong end of a conflict that Europe and the United States are supporting.
Okay, now, do you think are they better off today?
Of course not, no. No one even knows what the situation is. There doesn't appear to be a government of any sort. And I think the fights for power will continue. My understanding of Libya was it was a reasonable place to live, that there was an extensive welfare state,
yes,
that people could get education, that young married couples were given grants of money to begin their life together, and that it was quite a reasonable situation. It just, you see, it was possible to destabilize it because Arabs seem to be more opposed to one another than they are to foreign occupiers.
Oh, so they are like our people.
Yeah, if it weren't for the split within these countries, the United States and Western Europe wouldn't be able to manipulate them and occupy them the way they do. You see, the Middle East is in great trouble because of the differences between the Sunni and the Shiites. And this plays into American hands, British hands, French hands. It always has. So as long as people are split like that, and this is what Washington is doing to the old Soviet Union. It's turning former constituent parts of the Soviet Union into American allies against Russia.
Hey, George Soros financed our revolution, in 1989. I was one of the people out on the street, so I know. I was tricked. I can admit it. I was tricked. Yeah.
Yes, they tricked a lot of people because of the Cold War and because of the Soviet oppression. A lot of people look to America as if it's some sort of a very moral God dispensing truth and justice. And they forget that Americans are people too. And they have the same sins, ambitions, greed, and they use power just as ruthlessly as Stalin. and so, but people don't realize that. So it lets Washington get away with so much. For example,
well, they didn't realize it because the propaganda is so good. See,
the propaganda is good. That's right. You see, the United States is always denouncing other countries for human rights violations.
yes.
But the United States is the only country killing people in 6 lands. It's the only country that trashed its own constitution and claims the right to murder its own citizens without due process.
Now, is it happening or is it just still on the paper?
Oh, it's happening. So far, it only happens to people they say are terrorists. Particularly if they're in a different country. For example, the first ones they killed was the father and son in Yemen. Remember, they sent a missile or a drone.
Yeah.
And it turns out that this father was simply a man who spoke up for Muslims.
Yeah.
And said that they have rights too, but this was too much. And his son was traveling with him, so he got killed too. And what's happened now, Washington has said that all males of combat age who get killed anywhere are terrorists. They're insurgents. Because, Pakistan has complained about the use of drones to kill Pakistanis.
Yes.
And we always say, no, they're terrorists, and then the locals say, no, they're not, they're farmers.
All right, so you kill someone who you don't like or by accident, and you just call him a terrorist, and that's fine, then everything is all right. It's justified.
That's what we've done. That is what the new policy is. All males killed are terrorists.
Yeah, I would like to point out one thing. You are talking about the American government, you are not talking about the American people. See, the problem in Europe is that the Europeans think that all the Americans are like that. But I've been to the US and I've got plenty of friends, and they are same people like we are. It's the government who is actually doing this.
That's right, but if you actually thought it was democracy, you would say, though, but the people are letting the government do it. They're not stopping them. But, of course, the people feel, well, first of all, a lot of the people support it because they believe that the government's telling them the truth and that we're in danger and we have to kill them over there before they come over here. A lot of people are stupid enough to believe it. The people who are smart enough not to believe it feel powerless. They realize they've been in enough arguments with fellow citizens who believe the propaganda that they see you can't affect propaganda.
Look,
fact.
Hey, it's my life story, so yes, I do understand. I know how it works.
Well, that's the way it works.
All right, Dr. Roberts, I would like just to go back to this Iraqi war. It was, Bush started it on claims which weren't true, and we knew at the time. But then the American people who believed him, they found out that, it wasn't true. So how come they still stayed in there for a long time? How come the American people didn't come and say, well, all right, you lied to us, now stop it. It cost us money and it cost Iraqis lives.
Well, that's a good question. I think, first of all, if the media had done its job, it would have been a voice for the people to put this pressure. But it didn't. It covered up for the government. Now, if Obama had come in and held the Bush administration accountable for its lies and its crimes, it was a war crime under the Nuremberg Standard. Under international law, almost the entirety of the Bush government are war criminals. This is just a fact. It's not my opinion. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
But instead of holding them accountable, which is what the people elected Obama to do, he pardoned them, in effect. He let them off the hook and said, we're not looking backward, we're only looking forward. And so they've gotten away with it.
Same thing happened here after the communists went down. No one held them accountable. No one went after them. They just, they are amongst us, very rich people now.
Well, so if you can't hold the government accountable, you are not really a democracy. You're powerless. And that's what I said. The American people, in effect, are serfs. They haven't, their voice doesn't matter. It doesn't count.
Well, I wouldn't be, there are voices, there are alternative media which you can actually hear, even here. It's not that bad. All my knowledge must have come from somewhere, and it didn't come from the CNN, so it's not that bad, but you have to look it up.
You have to look it up, but you see also what it is, in my opinion. The governments are used or accustomed only to paying attention to the print and TV media. That's the customary voice, and that voice is now congenial to them, so they don't pay any attention to what's said on the alternative media. It just doesn't enter into the national discussion. It's not quoted in the newspapers. It's not quoted on the TV shows. It's not quoted in the congressional record. So they just ignore it. Now, if it reaches the point that they can't ignore it or it becomes too problematic, they will close it down.
They will find a way.
They will find a way.
Wow.
Or they will start making examples out of the more outspoken people, such as myself.
Yeah, well, I'm quite curious how long we are going to last.
Yeah, that's it. Now, the trouble, though, is that this whole process is itself a danger to itself, because they can't control China or Russia or India.
But they think they can.
Or South America, if countries that comprise a huge share of the world GDP stop using the dollar, it's going to weaken the power of the Americans. If the dollar is no longer the world reserve currency, Washington can't pay its bills by printing money, and it can't finance its wars.
Might be a good thing, though.
It could be a good thing. So this may all come to a halt because the process is so unbalanced. There's such a lack of serious debate or awareness of the consequences of the policies that Washington is following and perpetrating and perpetuating. And these policies they rely on violence, hypocrisy, and these things tend to get noticed as time goes on, and people tend to get tired of them. And even people in Eastern Europe and Russia that still think America is the light of the world, they will wake up, and it gets to be harder.
Yeah, that's what I would like to ask you as a final question, Dr. Roberts. That is there any hope for the Americans and the Europeans? Is it going to be turned around, or what can everybody do to help to turn it around?
I don't think it can be done from within, and I think the turnaround will come when the rest of the world rejects the leadership of the United States and Europe, and when they reject the dollar as reserve currency. Then this limits the power so much and causes change internal. So I think the only way Europe or the United States can be turned around is to be rejected by the rest of the world.
So can we help it somehow from inside, or you think we cannot?
Well, not if the Americans control your government, control your media,
Well, not us.
or it's more important to your government to be a member of NATO or the EU or the group of something or the other, or whatever goodies the Americans can hand out to buy you, then nothing can happen. But if they lose the dollar as reserve currency, they lose the ability to purchase other governments.
Well, euro is going down the drain, so, Dr. Roberts, thank you very much for joining us. We are out of time. I really appreciate you coming on, and I hope we could contact you in the future, and because there are so many things I would like to talk to you about, but we just don't have time now.
Yes, no, I understand. We've been on for a long time, and I'll be pleased to talk to you again, Norbert.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.